Okay, thank you so much. And welcome to this important 30 days of activism, trying to highlight women's resilience in climate action, what we do to keep our planet safe, and the rest. Looking at the fact that every woman right matters, action to contribute. Today, and that special episode, and we have Georgetown Institute for Women and Peace and Security Fellow. She's also a Hillary Clinton Fellow too, and she has been playing a lot of roles when it comes to women, gender, peace, security, and the intercept within those three things. So she's going to be sharing more light on what we need to know, how women has been playing all of these roles, and yet they are bearing the brunt of the climate change crisis. And hence, we need to keep including gender smart approaches in dealing with these issues that are defining us in our society. So she's going to quickly introduce herself to us, then we begin. Thank you, Clara, for coming.
Thank you so much, Adenike, for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I'm a big fan of your work, so thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm the Hillary Rodham Clinton Fellow at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, or GIWPS, so based at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., where we're all about creating an evidence-based case for the prioritization of the women, peace, and security agenda. So in terms of my work specifically, I'm helping build our portfolio on climate change and disaster risk reduction. So not only raising awareness about the disproportionate impacts that climate change has on women, but also highlighting how women are really powerful agents of change in tackling the climate crisis. So it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Indeed, women are very powerful as an agent of change in our society. And that is why our voices are needed when it comes to issues, representation, society, to see that we are not just bringing and making all solutions to be holistic, to be gender sensitive. Mm-hmm. And so just to quickly start with our first question, to ask you that what are interception when it comes to women's security and peace? Because I know you must have been a very brilliant person, because you are one of the fellows when it comes to Georgetown Institute for Women and Peace and Security. So what are those interceptions that you see between women, peace and security? How is climate change playing a big role in between these three issues?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I would just start by saying that the climate crisis, as you know, is the existential threat of our time. So, in addition to its direct impacts on environmental systems, climate change exacerbates underlying conditions like water and food insecurity, economic hardship, humanitarian crises, and political fragility. So all of these things can weaken social cohesion and provoke new or renewed conflict and threaten global peace and security. I think a really important point is that climate vulnerability and fragility are interlinking and reinforcing. So in 26 of the 39 states classified as highly fragile by USAID, a large share of the population faces significant climate risks. So water scarcity and the depletion of arable land, for example, fuels conflict between farming and pastoralist communities who are dependent on these resources for their livelihoods. And then conflict, in turn, accelerates environmental degradation, which diminishes adaptive capacity and can increase the susceptibility to future climate risks. And then in terms of how women fit into this equation, the impacts of climate change are not gender neutral. So pre-existing vulnerabilities and patterns of discrimination rooted in structural inequalities create disproportionate impacts for women and other marginalized groups who are less able to absorb and recover from climate shocks. And the confluence of these dynamics is what we call the gender-climate fragility nexus, or in extreme cases where it actually leads to conflict, the climate-gender conflict nexus.
Very well, because all issues in our world today are now gendered. So we are seeing
Absolutely.
this through a lot of impact in our society today. So it is not all about the environment sector, it's beyond the environment sector. It is now housing, because we see women in my community trekking distance to get cooking water, because there is no there's water scarcity, which has to do with water resources department. I don't know, for some countries they have it different ministry, they have it joint ministry. So it's all about all the sectors that are all gendered related issues, and hence women have a great role to play in trying to bring up issues, solutions that could help. So they become peace bridger, peacemakers. They become conflict resolution experts and the rest. And so just to ask you some of the questions that we have today, which is the second question, which says that women are disappropriately impacted by climate change and conflict. So how are they impacted by this climate and conflict? We want to see the connections. How did they connect to each other? Are they being impacted? Because I see women being disadvantaged in several ways as they're impacted by the climate change crisis. They're also being impacted by conflict happening in the area. So they don't necessarily are the persons that cause this conflict. They are not the ones that up these conflict related issues, but yet they are the burden bearers of the defining issue of our time. So how are they connected to this? How are women impacted by climate related issue and conflicts?
Mhm. Absolutely. So as you said, women are disproportionately impacted by both climate change and by conflict. And just to start with a very stark example that I think illustrates the point well, with regard to climate change, it's been recorded that women are actually 14 times more likely than men to die in natural disasters. So this is for a lot of potential reasons, but notably in a lot of cultures, women are not taught how to swim, and so they're more likely to drown than men. Also, low literacy rates among women can mean that early warning systems may be posted, but women are not able to read them, or they're not easily accessible. And so, with natural disasters occurring 5 times as often today as they were just 40 years ago, largely due to climate change, this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. And we need to be talking about how gender plays a role in this. And I would say, in terms of how it relates to conflict, the gendered impacts of climate change in many ways mirror the same vulnerabilities that women face in situations of conflict. And that's because climate change and conflict are interlinking and reinforcing. So, for example, in Somalia, shifting precipitation patterns due to climate change leads to water scarcity and contributes to higher rates of clan violence and honor killings, which particularly harm women. Early marriage rates also rise as families cope with livelihood insecurity. And as climate stressors displace people into IDP camps, we know that rates of sexual violence rise. And then another example, it's well documented that around the world, women are responsible for a disproportionate share of unpaid labor, including providing water for households, as you mentioned, as well as fuel. So more time spent on these activities due to climate change increase the exposure of women and girls to gender-based violence. It also has implications for women's economic empowerment and their ability to pursue paid work, as well as opportunities for girls to stay enrolled in school. This is what is sometimes referred to as time poverty. So in Guatemala, for example, women now dedicate up to 8 hours per day searching for water, which is almost double the time and distance that was required in normal years. So these are just a couple examples to show the disproportionate impacts and how fragility and climate change are reinforcing. And so we can't look at one without the other.
Definitely. We have to look at holistic solutions, and which you have just mentioned, like you have just mentioned quite a lot of those issues that is very important, and we need to take into consideration that women are at the forefront of the crisis, of the impact of the climate change crisis, but yet their voice are left behind. So in order to solve this issue, we have to make it holistic, because I got to see a report where it stated that it takes women 20 million hours in a day for them to be able to fetch water. And that is the reality for us in Sahel, in Lake Chad region, where women have to trek distance, many kilometers for them to be able to access these natural resources that is shrinking, that is depleting, because they don't have the rights for them to own land, for them to own all of these resources, which they could use to transform their society to be sustainable, you know. So the ability for them to become custodian of their environment isn't there. So they don't have all of those rights. It is limited. So that brings me to the next question I have for you. Why do you think it is important for us to involve women in climate intervention or negotiation or peace building or peace and conflict resolution? And what are the benefits? Because I was once a Nigerian youth delegate, and it's very important when we see women at the table when it comes to decision making. It gets to steer things up. It gets to tell our reality ourselves of what is happening in the room, and not we outside the table and people are trying to make decisions for us. So we want to see that women are making decisions for ourselves by ourselves, you know, to see how we can improve our society. So I just want to get your perspective. Why do you think women have to be included in climate intervention, peace building, peace and conflict resolution, climate negotiation, and what are the benefits? Thank you.
Well, I think the bottom line is not only is it the right thing to do for gender equality, but we also know that it's the smart thing to do. So let me start off by saying that the same structural inequalities that make women more vulnerable to climate change and conflict also often marginalize them from fully participating in solutions and having a seat at the table, which is why efforts to address drivers of inequality are crucial to our ability to successfully respond to the climate crisis. And I think very importantly, this inextricable link between gender, climate change, and fragility has to be reflected not only in discussions of these challenges, but also in approaches to addressing them. Because the logic is just as vulnerabilities can be mutually reinforcing, as I mentioned, solutions can be too. So just as climate change can serve as a threat multiplier, engaging women in climate interventions can serve as a benefit multiplier. What I mean by that is, given their unique experiences, roles, and knowledge of how to manage and conserve natural resources, women are one of the best and most underutilized forces to combat the climate crisis. And gender responsive climate interventions are a pathway to bolster women's economic empowerment and role in decision making, which has the potential to positively impact not only the climate crisis, but also strengthen efforts to advance gender equality and global peace and security. Research actually shows that moving the needle on gender equality has direct implications for global peace and security and for climate resilience. For example, analysis from our 2021 to 2022 Global Women, Peace and Security Index, which we do at the Institute, it measures women's well-being in 170 countries, and it found that countries that score better on this WPS index are also better positioned to address climate change. So this, I think there's a correlation of about 0.8, a really strong correlation. So this further underscores why looking at these issues together is critical to effective action, and how investing in women can accelerate progress on both climate change and gender equality.
Yeah, very well. Very well. We've spoken much about what we need to do, why it is very important. And yeah, we could see that women, the percentages of women in House of Rep, Senate, President, it's not as much as what we think. And you know, when women becomes president, for some few countries that women have become a president, we have seen how tremendous they have been able to scale up action within that space that we were given leadership to do so. We could projects and the rest to try to contribute their best in such. So women leadership is could be key towards solving the climate change crisis. And We also need a gender smart approach. You just mentioned that it's a smart way for us to be able to involve women in all of these decision making processes. And that what are the most promising practices for including women in climate intervention? That is one. Then secondly, where are women already making differences and what could be replicated or scaled up?
So my current research at Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security is focused on identifying entry points for engaging women in climate interventions as a way to simultaneously tackle the climate crisis, improve women's economic empowerment, reduce fragility, and promote overall peace and security. So first, before we could identify these entry points, we had to really conceptualize the problem. And after an extensive literature review, we identified and analyzed two important drivers of fragility that are linked to climate change and that disproportionately impact women. So one is food insecurity, and two is energy poverty and reliance on non-renewable energy. So drawing on findings from a range of case studies across the global South, we identified women's engagement in climate smart agriculture and renewable energy as critical entry points to address drivers of food insecurity and energy poverty and reliance on non-renewable energy. So in terms of promising practices for including women in these types of climate interventions, we have some key takeaways from the case studies that we reviewed that I would love to just briefly share with you. So first and foremost, we have to address barriers to inclusion. Climate interventions should be informed by an intersectional gender analysis to ensure that women have equal access to participation in these various initiatives. So for example, a program in Southern Egypt introduced resilient agricultural practices in a gender responsive way. Given that land cultivation is predominantly reserved for men in Southern Egypt, extra care was taken by the program implementers, Adaptation Fund and World Food Program to ensure that women would benefit from the program. So women-only sessions were created to reach women who didn't feel comfortable participating in sessions with men. Other measures to increase women's participation in the program included minimizing the distance between training venues and women's homes and flexible timing of sessions. And then also in partnership with local NGOs, home visits by women volunteers were also organized to maximize outreach to women. So that's the first one, addressing barriers to inclusion. Second, it is absolutely essential that women have access to education and to information. So women need appropriate education and resources, and that includes access to technology and information, as well as education around how climate change can impact their livelihoods and why it is important to adapt their practices. So for example, given the increase in variability and frequency of extreme weather events due to climate change, farmers often struggle to make strategic agricultural decisions. For example, information gaps can lead to over-application of pesticides and fertilizer and over-under irrigation. And so this increases output costs and reduces productivity and also leads to reduced soil fertility. So to address this challenge, an amazing organization called SEWA, which stands for the Self-Employed Women's Association, did a project in Gujarat, India, and it collaborated with agricultural experts to design a voice-based agro-advisory system to make information widely accessible to women, regardless of literacy level. It provided information on weather, pests, and markets for women farmers and guided women farmers to grow more profitable crops based on available future crop prices. So consequently, women farmers improved their lives with access to information which they use to guide strategic agricultural decisions. And then third, we found that it is also so critical to position women as leaders. Women have an influential role to play as leaders, decision makers, and entrepreneurs in project design and implementation. So rather than being viewed solely as beneficiaries of climate interventions, women need to be positioned as key contributors. So for example, engaging women in design efforts can ensure that renewable energy technology takes women's needs into account and increases the likelihood that other women will also adopt this technology. So for example, a failure to consult women in the design of clean cook stoves in Nigeria resulted in a product that was not large enough or sturdy enough to feed large families. So these stoves went unused. So I think that's a really great, strong example. And then lastly, the final thing is we need to fill knowledge gaps. Diverse case studies and data related to women's contributions to climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts are severely lacking at this point, and development institutions have an important role to play in filling these critical knowledge gaps and collecting more data. So those are kind of some of the key takeaways from my research. Women are already making amazing contributions, but we need to have more resources for these efforts.
Yeah, kudos. You know, you are really doing a great work, I know. So a lot, you have mentioned quite a number of things that you does, the report and the rest, and I would like to read more of that report to also get an insight, I know, on women, peace, security, because there are many things that defines women's rights in our society. For them, it could give them assets, give them ownership of a phone, or get other basic facilities that they need or resources for them to be able to improve their productivity. And it could also bring them to, it could also improve their innovativeness, ideas, and even bring indigenous knowledge into what they are doing in solving crises. So we have very few number of women that could boast that they own a land, maybe due to cultural, traditional, religion, and different kind of barriers that is affecting women's rights globally, affecting their ability for them to be able to have access to all of these things, or affecting or limiting their rights. So I believe everyone should have a right to be right, because such right has a solution to give in solving crisis in our society. So nobody's right should be left behind when we are trying to provide solution. Nobody's right is greater than anybody's right. We should all have it in mind that we all have equal right for bring solutions to the table, irrespective of our sex or gender or where we are from or where we are. So very well tipped of this topic when it comes, you dwell also on disaster reduction aspects too, trying to integrate all of these aspects together, how we can bring up solutions in our various community. And also thank you for what you do in Georgetown Institute, the Women, Peace and Security. I really admire you people's work from afar. And I know one of these days we get to meet and talk and get to collaborate a lot. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to have this conversation with you, and you are a really important leader in this field and an example to us all, as well as an inspiration to me. So I just wanted to end by saying that we're not going to tackle the climate crisis without women. So additional resources are essential to identify and scale up solutions, and sustained efforts are really needed to dismantle barriers to women's inclusion. And only then can climate interventions reach their full potential. So all of this will be discussed in our upcoming report at GIWPS, which is coming out later this year. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm really grateful. And I do believe that change starts with conversations like these for taking this initiative.
Thank you so much. So I'm really looking forward to another time like this with you. Thanks to be very helpful, very very educative, empowering to hear from you, your perspective on such angle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.